A Governess for the Traitor's Son. Chapter 1. The House on the Saltwind Coast. The village of Porthgarrow clung to the edge of Cornwall like a limpet to a storm-battered rock, its grey granite cottages huddled together as if for warmth against the ceaseless Atlantic wind. For Evelyn Thorne, recently widowed, recently impoverished, and recently arrived on the afternoon mail coach from Plymouth, it felt very much like the end of the world. She pressed her gloved hand against the window of the Green Man Inn, watching the rain streak diagonally across the glass, blurring the single muddy street into a watercolour wash of brown and grey. Behind her, the taproom murmured with low voices and the click of dominoes, conversations that had faltered when she entered and had not quite recovered. Strangers were noticed in Porthgarrow. Strangers in black bombazine with pale faces and haunted eyes were noticed and speculated upon in equal measure. The letter had come 6 weeks ago, forwarded from the cramped lodgings in Bath she could no longer afford. Thick cream paper, expensive, bearing the seal of a London solicitor she had never heard of. A position as governess, it read, to a boy of 7 years, at Valewood, on the coast of Cornwall. References required. Character essential. Generous remuneration. She had accepted within the hour, not because she was brave or adventurous or seeking a new chapter in her sad, abbreviated life. She accepted because the alternative was accepting charity from her late husband's family, who had made it abundantly clear that their charity came with conditions: gratitude, deference, and the perpetual status of poor relation. Evelyn had spent 2 years being pitied. She would rather spend the rest of her life in exile than spend another month as an object of condescension. What the letter had not mentioned, what no letter could adequately convey, was the nature of the family she was entering. She learned that in the Green Man, from the fragments of whispered conversation that reached her through the rain-streaked glass. Callum Devenish, that's who owns Valewood now, the brother. Cold as the grave, they say. Aye, and who can blame him? The shame of it. His own flesh and blood, a traitor to the crown. Captain Lucian Devenish. I remember him, you know. Rode through this village like a lord, always a kind word for the children. Never would have thought it. Treason doesn't wear a sign, Mother. That's the whole point. Evelyn's fingers tightened around the handle of her valise. A traitor. She was to be governess to a traitor's son. Her husband, Samuel, had been a captain in the 43rd Foot, killed at Badajoz 3 years ago, charging a breach with his men behind him. He had died for his country, for the crown, for everything this unknown captain had allegedly betrayed. The irony was so sharp it might have drawn blood. She should leave. She should walk back out into the rain, find the coachman, and beg passage back to Plymouth, back to Bath, back to the pitying faces and the cramped rooms and the slow, suffocating death of respectability. But she did not move. She had learned something in 3 years of widowhood. Pride was a costly companion, but it was the only one she had left. The door of the inn banged open, admitting a gust of salt-wet wind and a man who seemed to have been carved from the same grey stone as the cliffs. He was tall and lean, with dark hair plastered to his forehead by the rain, and eyes the colour of a winter sea, pale, cold, and fathomless. He wore no hat, no greatcoat, just a plain dark jacket and boots crusted with dried mud. He stood in the doorway for a moment, scanning the room with a gaze that missed nothing, and when it landed on Evelyn, it stopped. Mrs. Thorne. It was not a question. She rose, her knees unsteady beneath her. Yes. I am Callum Devenish. He did not offer his hand. He did not smile. He simply looked at her with those pale, assessing eyes, and Evelyn had the uncomfortable sensation of being weighed and found, if not wanting, then certainly not exceeding expectations. The cart is outside. We should go before the light fails completely. He took her valise without asking and carried it out into the rain. Evelyn followed, pausing only long enough to pull the hood of her cloak over her bonnet. The innkeeper's wife caught her eye as she passed, and there was something in that look, pity perhaps, or warning, that made Evelyn's stomach clench. The cart was little more than a farm wagon, open to the elements, drawn by a single stout pony. Callum Devonish helped her up with a hand that was impersonal and brief, then climbed onto the bench beside her and flicked the reins. They lurched forward into the rain. For the first mile they travelled in silence. The track wound steadily upward, away from the village and out onto the open headland. To their left, the land rose in great folded sweeps of heather and gorse, dark and sodden. To their right, the ground fell away in a dizzying drop to the sea, which boiled against the rocks 200 feet below, with a sound like continuous thunder. The wind tore at Evelyn's cloak, at the hood of her bonnet, at the very breath in her lungs. "You will find it quiet at Valewood," Callum Devonish said eventually, his voice flat against the wind. "My nephew requires firm handling. He has had a difficult year. I expect you to be equal to the task." "I have experience with children," Evelyn said. "My sister's family. I helped raise her 3. "Boys?" "2 of them." He nodded, a short, sharp movement. "Good. Leo is not a bad child. He is merely lost. I do not have the talent for finding lost things." He said it without self-pity, as a simple statement of fact. "You will have free rein in the schoolroom. The household answers to Mrs. Trevose, the housekeeper. She will see to your needs. I trust you will not require much." It was not a question, so Evelyn did not answer it. She was too busy watching the house emerge from the gloom ahead. Valewood stood on the very tip of the headland, a long, low mansion of dark granite that seemed to grow from the rock itself. It faced the sea with a kind of defiant arrogance, its mullioned windows staring out at the Atlantic like blank, unseeing eyes. There was no garden, no softening touch of greenery, just the house, the cliffs, and the endless pounding sea. It was the loneliest place Evelyn had ever seen. The cart clattered into a cobbled courtyard, sheltered from the worst of the wind. A groom appeared from a stable door, a wizened man with a face like a walnut, who took the pony's head without a word. Callum Devonish helped Evelyn down, again impersonal, again brief, and carried her valise toward a heavy oak door. Inside, the house was no warmer than the courtyard. The entrance hall was vast and cold, floored in black and white marble that echoed with every step. A fire roared in a fireplace large enough to roast an ox, but its heat seemed to be swallowed by the sheer volume of empty space. Portraits lined the walls, generations of Devonishes, Evelyn assumed, all with the same pale eyes and stern expressions, watching her pass with the silent judgment of the dead. "Mrs. Trevose will show you to your room," Callum said, setting down her valise. "Leo's schoolroom is in the east turret. You will begin your duties tomorrow." He paused, and for a moment something flickered in those cold eyes. Uncertainty, perhaps, or something darker. "He will not thank you for being there. He does not thank anyone for anything. But he is a child, and children need. I do not know what they need. That is why you are here." He turned and walked away, disappearing through a door at the far end of the hall, and Evelyn was left alone with her valise and the portraits and the sound of the sea, which seemed to permeate every stone of this grim, grey house. Mrs. Trevose appeared as if summoned by magic, a thin, severe woman in an apron so stiff it might have been starched with iron. She looked Evelyn up and down with the same assessing gaze as her master, and apparently found her acceptable because she merely nodded and said, "This way, Mrs. Thorne. Mind the stairs. The 4th one creaks." Evelyn's room was in the east wing, a small, clean chamber with a narrow bed, a washstand, and a window that looked out over the sea. It was not welcoming, but it was not hostile either. It was simply there, like everything else in this house, present, functional, and utterly devoid of warmth. She was unpacking her few belongings when she heard it, a sound so faint she almost missed it, carried on the draughts that whispered through the ancient corridors. It was a child's voice, high and thin, singing something wordless and sad. It came from above, from the turret Mrs. Trevose had mentioned, from the schoolroom. Evelyn stood very still, listening. The song went on for perhaps a minute, then stopped. In the silence that followed, she heard another sound, the creak of a floorboard, the soft thud of something being set down. Then nothing. She did not go up. She told herself it was because she was tired, because the journey had been long, because she would meet the boy tomorrow in the proper way. But the truth, though she would not admit it even to herself, was that she was afraid. Not of the child, but of what she might see in his eyes. The same lost, wounded look she saw every morning in her own mirror. Chapter 2. The Boy Who Waited. The schoolroom occupied the entire top floor of the east turret, a circular room with windows on all sides that looked out over the sea, the cliffs, and the endless empty sky. It should have been the most beautiful room in the house, flooded with light, alive with the constant movement of clouds and water. Instead, it felt like a prison, airy, elegant, and utterly isolated from the world below. Leo Devonish was already there when Evelyn arrived the next morning, sitting at a small desk with his back to the door, staring out at the sea. He did not turn when she entered, did not acknowledge her presence in any way. He simply sat, motionless, his small hands folded on the desk in front of him. Evelyn closed the door softly and crossed the room, her footsteps loud in the silence. She came to stand beside him, looking out at the same view, grey sea, grey sky, the white flash of gulls wheeling over the waves. "It's very big," she said quietly. "The sea, I mean. It makes everything else seem small." The boy said nothing. He did not even blink. "My husband used to say that," Evelyn continued, sitting down in the chair beside his desk. "He was a soldier. He fought in Spain. He said the mountains there made him feel the same way, small, but also part of something larger. He said it was a comfort." Still nothing. The boy's profile was sharp for a child of 7, his features already showing the promise of the Devonish severity. His hair was dark, like his uncle's, and his eyes, when he finally turned to look at her, were the same pale grey but softer, still capable of light. "They took my father away," he said. His voice was flat, empty, as if he were reciting a lesson. "They said he did something bad. They said he was a traitor." Evelyn met his gaze steadily. "Do you believe them?" He blinked, the first crack in his stillness. "No." "Why not?" "Because he promised he would come back." The boy's voice wavered, just slightly. "He never breaks promises. He said so." Evelyn thought of Samuel, standing in the doorway of their cottage in Devon, smiling that crooked smile of his. "I'll be home before the leaves fall," he had said. The leaves had fallen 3 times now, and he was still not home. "Sometimes," she said carefully, "grown-ups make promises they mean to keep, but something happens, something they cannot control. My father is not like that." The boy's voice was fierce now, a spark of life in the grey eyes. "He is a captain. He commands a ship. He does not let things happen to him. He makes things happen." Evelyn smiled, despite herself. "Then perhaps we should wait for him together. While we wait, we can do lessons. Would you like that?" The boy considered this for a long moment. "Will you teach me about ships?" "If you like. And about the stars. For navigation. If that is what you wish to learn." He nodded once, a small, decisive movement. "Then we can do lessons." He slid off his chair and walked to a corner of the room where a wooden ship sat on a low table, a model exquisitely made, with tiny sails and rigging and even smaller cannons peeking through gun ports. He picked it up carefully, reverently, and brought it back to his desk. "This is the Sea Sprite," he said, setting it down between them. "My father's ship. He had it made for me so I would always know what he was doing. Every morning I move it a little bit, so it sails across the ocean." He pointed to a map pinned to the wall, marked with a tiny red line. "He is here now, off the coast of France. He will be home by summer." Evelyn looked at the map, at the careful, hopeful line the boy had drawn across the Atlantic. She looked at the ship, at the loving detail in every carved plank and tiny block. And she looked at Leo, at the fierce, desperate hope burning in his grey eyes, and she made a decision. Whatever Captain Lucien Devenish had or had not done, whatever the world believed about him, this boy deserved better than the cold, silent house and the uncle who could not find lost things. He deserved someone who would wait with him. "Then we have much to learn before summer," she said. "A captain's son must know his navigation." For the first time, Leo smiled. It was a small thing, a brief flicker, but it transformed his face completely. "I know some already. Papa taught me." "Then you can teach me." And so began the strange, quiet rhythm of their days. Mornings were for lessons, reading, writing, arithmetic, and always, always, something about ships or stars or the sea. Afternoons were for walks along the cliffs, when the weather permitted, with Leo clutching his wooden ship and Evelyn watching him run ahead, a small figure against the vastness of the sky. Evenings were for supper in the schoolroom, because Leo refused to eat in the dining room where his father's empty chair waited, and then stories by the fire until his eyes grew heavy. Callum Devenish remained a distant presence. Evelyn saw him at meals when she descended to the dining room for a solitary supper after Leo was in bed. They exchanged few words, a comment on the weather, an inquiry about Leo's progress, always answered briefly and without elaboration. He asked nothing about her past, about her husband. He seemed determined to maintain the same distance from her that he maintained from everyone else. But Evelyn watched him. She could not help it. There was something in his stillness, in the way his eyes followed Leo when he thought no one was looking, that spoke of a deeper feeling than his cold manner suggested. He was not cruel, merely absent. He provided for Leo's needs, books, clothes, a warm room, but gave nothing of himself. It was as if he had built a wall around his heart and dared the world to breach it. One afternoon, a week into her stay, Evelyn found herself in the library, searching for a book on celestial navigation that Leo had requested. The library was a large, comfortable room at the back of the house, lined with books from floor to ceiling and warmed by a fire that burned continuously, regardless of whether anyone was using it. It was, she had discovered, Callum Devenish's domain. He spent his evenings there, behind a closed door, doing whatever it was that men in remote houses did with their time. The book was on a high shelf, requiring the use of a ladder. Evelyn was perched precariously halfway up when the door opened and Callum walked in. He stopped short at the sight of her, his expression shifting from surprise to something she could not read. "Mrs. Thorne, I did not expect to find anyone here." "I apologize for the intrusion. Leo needed a book." She gestured vaguely at the shelves. "Navigation." He nodded, crossing to his desk and setting down a sheaf of papers he had been carrying. "He is obsessed with the sea. His father was a captain. It is natural." Something flickered in Callum's eyes. Pain, perhaps, or anger, quickly suppressed. "Yes. His father was many things." Evelyn descended the ladder, the book in her hands. She should have left then. She should have thanked him and returned to the schoolroom. But something held her there, some instinct that had been prickling at the back of her mind since she arrived. "May I ask you something, Mr. Devenish?" He looked up from his papers, his expression guarded. "You may ask." "What do you believe? About your brother, I mean. Do you believe he was a traitor?" The silence that followed was so profound that Evelyn could hear the crackle of the fire, the distant moan of the wind, the thudding of her own heart. Callum's face went very still, all expression draining away until he looked like one of the portraits in the hall. That is not a question a governess should ask her employer. No, Evelyn agreed. It is not. But I am asking it anyway. He stared at her for a long moment, and she stared back, refusing to look away. She had faced down Spanish infantry, or at least the widow of a man who had. She could face down one brooding Cornish gentleman. "Why?" he asked finally. "Why does it matter to you what I believe?" "Because Leo believes his father is innocent. He believes it with his whole heart, and if there is even a chance that he is right, then that boy deserves someone who will fight for him, not just provide for him." Callum's jaw tightened. He looked away toward the fire, and for a moment he seemed almost vulnerable, almost human. "I do not know what I believe," he said quietly. The evidence was compelling. A letter in his hand, detailing a signal plan. The sinking of a British frigate on the very night described. The court saw no reason to doubt. "And you?" He was silent for so long that Evelyn thought he would not answer. Then, so softly she almost missed it. "I saw my brother cry when he heard how many men had died. He was not crying for himself. He was crying for them. Traitors do not weep for the men they kill." He turned back to her, and his eyes were no longer cold. They were filled with something raw and anguished, a grief so deep it had calcified into stone. "Does that answer your question, Mrs. Thorne?" Evelyn nodded slowly. "Yes, it does." She left the library with the book in her hands and a new weight in her heart. Callum Devonish did not believe his brother was guilty. He suspected, as she now suspected, that something was terribly wrong. But suspicion was not proof, and without proof, there was nothing to be done. Or was there? That night, as she lay in her narrow bed listening to the sea, Evelyn thought about the letter she had glimpsed on Callum's desk. It had been open, face up, and she had seen enough to recognize the official seal of the Admiralty. She had seen enough to read the first line. "Regarding the late Captain Lucian Devonish, we have received new information." New information. What kind of information? And why had Callum not mentioned it? She fell asleep with questions swirling in her mind, and when she woke the next morning, she knew what she had to do. Not for herself, not even for Callum. For Leo, who waited every day for a ship that might never come home. Chapter 3. What the Sea Conceals. The opportunity came 3 days later when Callum received an urgent message and departed for London on the morning coach. Mrs. Trevose informed Evelyn of this at breakfast, her tone suggesting that the master's absences were frequent and not to be remarked upon. "He'll be gone a week, perhaps longer. You'll have the schoolroom to yourself, and the boy. See that you don't let him run wild." Evelyn nodded, her heart beating faster. A week. 7 days in an empty house with only the servants for company. 7 days to find out what Callum Devonish was hiding in his locked desk drawer. She did not examine her motives too closely. She told herself it was for Leo, for the truth, for the memory of her own husband who had died for a country that might have condemned an innocent man. She told herself that she had a right to know, that everyone had a right to know, that justice demanded it. She did not tell herself that she wanted to understand the man who had looked at her with anguished eyes and admitted he did not know what to believe. That would have been too dangerous. The first 2 days passed in agonizing slowness. Evelyn went through the motions of lessons and walks and meals, her mind constantly wandering to the library, to the desk, to the possibilities hidden there. She waited until the servants had retired, until the house was dark and silent, until Leo was safely asleep with his wooden ship clutched to his chest. On the third night, she crept down the spiral staircase, along the corridor, and into the library. The room was dark, lit only by the dying embers of the fire and the faint silver glow of the moon through the windows. Evelyn closed the door behind her and stood still, listening. Nothing. Just the creak of old timbers, the sigh of the wind, the distant thunder of the sea. She crossed to the desk. It was a massive thing, dark wood, with a central drawer and a dozen smaller ones on either side. She tried the central drawer first. Locked. She tried the others, one by one. All locked. Evelyn sat back on her heels, thinking. Samuel had kept a locked desk once for his military papers. He had hidden the key in the most obvious place imaginable, under the inkwell, because who would think to look there? She lifted the heavy glass inkwell. Nothing. She felt under the blotter, along the edge of the desk, behind the brass candlestick. Nothing. Then she remembered the letter she had glimpsed, lying open on the desk. It had not been in a drawer. It had been on the surface, as if Callum had been reading it when interrupted. She scanned the desktop, running her fingers over every surface, every crevice. Beneath the leather writing slope, her fingers encountered something small and metallic. A key. Her heart pounding, Evelyn fitted it into the central drawer. It turned with a soft click. She pulled the drawer open. Inside were papers. Dozens of them, some yellowed with age, some fresh, all tied with ribbon or string. Evelyn lifted them out carefully, carrying them to the window where the moonlight was strongest. The first document was the letter from the Admiralty. She read it quickly, her eyes scanning the formal language. New information has come to light regarding the communication that led to the sinking of the Dauntless. Evidence suggests the signal originated not from Captain Devonish, but from another party. Inquiry to be reopened pending review. Asterisk. Evelyn's breath caught. Another party. Not Captain Devonish. The Admiralty itself was questioning the verdict. She set the letter aside and reached for the next document. This one was older, the paper brittle, the ink faded. It was a letter, handwritten, addressed to my dearest brother. Callum, if you are reading this, then I am probably dead. Do not grieve too long. I always knew this life carried risks, but before you close the book on me, I beg you to consider one thing. I am not the man they say I am. The signal plan was real, but it was not mine. It was given to me by a man in Falmouth, a clerk from the Admiralty named Marcus Webb. He claimed it was a routine communication exercise, something to do with testing coastal defences. I did not question it at the time. I was a fool. When the Dauntless sank, I knew immediately what had happened. The signal I had relayed was not an exercise. It was a beacon. Someone used me to guide the French to that ship. But who? Webb disappeared the day after the sinking. I have been trying to find him ever since. I am sending this letter with a trusted man, to be delivered only if I am taken. I do not know who my enemy is, but I know he is powerful. If something happens to me, find Webb. He is the key. Your loving brother, Lucian Asterisk. Evelyn read the letter twice, 3 times, her hands trembling. Lucien Devonish had known. He had known he was being used, had known someone was trying to destroy him, had tried to warn his brother, but the warning had come too late, or Callum had not believed it, or... She looked at the date on the letter. It was nearly 2 years old, written a week before Lucien's arrest. Callum had had this letter for 2 years. He had known his brother claimed innocence, had known about Marcus Webb, had known that the Admiralty's case might be built on a lie. And he had done nothing. Or had he? Evelyn shuffled through the remaining papers. There were copies of letters sent to the Admiralty, requesting information about Webb. There were replies, formal and unhelpful, stating that no such clerk existed or had ever existed. There were notes in Callum's hand, recording names, dates, fragments of information, and there at the bottom of the pile, a folded newspaper cutting. She unfolded it carefully. It was from a Plymouth paper dated 6 months ago. The headline read, "Body found on Falmouth shore, identified as former Admiralty clerk." Evelyn read the article with growing horror. Marcus Webb had been found dead on the beach below the cliffs at Falmouth, his neck broken. The coroner's verdict: accidental death, likely a fall. But the article noted, almost as an afterthought, that Webb had been missing for 2 years, that he had disappeared shortly after the Devonish treason trial, that his family had given him up for dead. Accidental death. A convenient verdict for an inconvenient man. Evelyn sat back, the papers spread around her like evidence at a trial. She understood now. Callum had been investigating, quietly, desperately, trying to clear his brother's name. But every path led to a dead end, literally, in Webb's case. Someone had been covering their tracks for 2 years, and they had done it thoroughly. A sound behind her made her freeze. Mrs. Thorne. She turned slowly. Callum Devonish stood in the doorway, his face half in shadow, his eyes fixed on the papers scattered across his desk. He did not look angry. He looked tired and sad and utterly defeated. "I thought you were in London," Evelyn said, her voice remarkably steady. "I returned on the evening coach. Mrs. Trevose mentioned you had retired early. I came to—" He gestured vaguely at the room. "I came to think." Evelyn looked down at the papers, then back at him. You knew he was innocent, and you did nothing." "I did not know." His voice was sharp, defensive. "I suspected. There is a difference. I had a letter from my brother claiming innocence, but what brother would not? I had a name, a man who might have been able to help, but by the time I found him, he was dead. I had nothing but suspicions, and a family name already destroyed." "You could have fought. How?" He stepped into the room, close enough that she could see the shadows under his eyes, the lines of strain around his mouth. "The Admiralty closed ranks. Every inquiry I requested was denied. Every letter I wrote was ignored. I am a country gentleman with no political connections and no influence. I could not fight the entire British government." "You could have tried." "I did try." He swept a hand toward the desk, toward the years of accumulated evidence of his failure. "This is what trying looks like, Mrs. Thorne. This is what hope looks like when it has nowhere else to go. Papers, letters, dead ends. My brother is gone, and the man who destroyed him is still out there, still protected, still untouchable. And I am here, in this house, watching his son grow up believing in a lie." The anguish in his voice cut through Evelyn's anger. She looked at him, really looked, and saw not the cold, distant employer she had imagined, but a man drowning in guilt and grief, unable to save himself or anyone else. "Why did you not tell me?" she asked quietly. He laughed, a hollow sound. "Tell you what? That my brother might be innocent? That I have spent 2 years chasing shadows? That I have failed the only person who ever mattered to me?" He shook his head. "You came here to escape your own grief, Mrs. Thorne. I was not going to add mine to the burden." Evelyn was silent for a long moment. Then she gathered the papers carefully, stacked them neatly, and held them out to him. "We are not done," she said. "There is still a chance. The Admiralty letter mentioned a reopened inquiry. That is something. And we have Lucien's letter, and your notes, and the newspaper cutting. That is evidence. It may not be enough, but it is more than you had before." Callum stared at her, something flickering in his pale eyes. "You would help me? After everything?" "My husband died on that ship," Evelyn said. "If there is even a chance that his death was caused by treachery, real treachery, not your brother's, then I want the truth. For him, for Leo, for all of us." He took the papers from her, his fingers brushing against hers and lingering for just a moment longer than necessary. "Thank you," he said softly. "I did not expect to find an ally in my own house." "Neither did I," Evelyn admitted. "But here we are." They stood together in the moonlit library, surrounded by the ghosts of the past, and for the first time since she had arrived at Valewood, Evelyn felt something other than cold. She felt hope. Chapter 4. The Truth in the Flames. The weeks that followed were unlike anything Evelyn had experienced since her husband's death. She and Callum worked together side by side, poring over documents, composing letters, following every thread that might lead to the truth. It was exhausting, exhilarating, and terrifying in equal measure. With every revelation, they came closer to the heart of the conspiracy and closer to the people who had killed to protect it. Leo, sensing the shift in the household, grew quieter than ever. He spent long hours with his ship, moving it incrementally across the map, waiting for a father who would never come. Evelyn tried to prepare him, gently, for the possibility that his father might not return, but Leo refused to listen. His faith was absolute, unshakable, and heartbreaking. "He promised," he would say whenever Evelyn raised the subject. "He never breaks promises." Callum watched his nephew with the same anguished expression he wore whenever Lucien's name was mentioned. He tried, in his awkward way, to connect with the boy, bringing him books, sitting with him during meals, even attempting to join their walks along the cliffs. But the wall between them remained, built of years of silence and grief, and neither of them knew how to tear it down. Then, on a grey morning in late March, a letter arrived that changed everything. It was from the Admiralty, formal and official, requesting Callum's presence in London to give evidence at the reopened inquiry. A clerk named Marcus Webb had been found, not dead, as the newspaper had reported, but living under an assumed name in Plymouth, terrified for his life. He had come forward with information. The name of the man who had ordered the false signal, the man who had framed Lucian Devonish to protect himself. Sir Geoffrey Hawkes, a senior Admiralty official with connections to French intelligence. Hawkes had been selling information to the French for years, using men like Webb as intermediaries and men like Lucien as scapegoats. When the Dauntless sank, he had needed someone to blame, and Lucien, with his access to coastal signals and his known sympathy for the French, had been the perfect target. Callum read the letter aloud, his voice shaking. When he finished, he looked at Evelyn with eyes that were bright with unshed tears. "He was innocent," he whispered. "All this time, he was innocent." Evelyn reached across the table and took his hand. "We knew that. Now the world will know it too." Leo, who had been sitting quietly in the corner with his ship, looked up at them. "Does this mean Papa is coming home?" The question hung in the air, impossible to answer. Callum looked at Evelyn, his eyes begging for help, and she rose from her chair and crossed to kneel beside the boy. "Leo," she said gently, "your father cannot come home. He died, a long time ago. But he died an innocent man. He died a hero. And now everyone will know it." Leo stared at her, his small face crumpling. "But he promised." "I know." And he meant to keep that promise. He wanted to come home more than anything in the world, but sometimes even the best men cannot keep their promises because things happen that are beyond their control. That does not mean he did not love you. It means he loved you so much that he tried to come home, even when it was dangerous. For a long moment, Leo was silent. Then slowly, he held out his wooden ship. "He gave me this. He said it would always bring me back to him." Evelyn took the ship carefully, turning it over in her hands. "Then you must keep it always, and whenever you look at it, you will remember that your father loved you and that he was a good man." Leo nodded, a single solemn movement. Then he climbed into Evelyn's lap and buried his face in her shoulder, his small body shaking with sobs. She held him, rocking gently, and after a moment she felt Callum's hand on her shoulder, warm and solid and present. They stayed like that for a long time, the three of them, bound together by grief and hope and the fragile beginnings of something new. The inquiry was held in London, in a crowded courtroom thick with the smell of dust and old paper. Callum gave his evidence calmly, clearly, producing Lucian's letter, his own notes, the newspaper cutting that had proven false, Other witnesses followed. Marcus Webb, pale and trembling, describing how Hawkes had ordered him to deliver the false signal plan. Former colleagues of Hawkes testifying to his suspicious contacts with French agents. Even a French officer captured and willing to talk, who confirmed that Hawkes had been selling information for years. Sir Geoffrey Hawkes sat in the dock, his face expressionless, his eyes fixed on some distant point. He did not speak in his own defence. He did not need to. The evidence against him was overwhelming. When the verdict was announced, guilty on all charges, the courtroom erupted. But Callum did not stay to hear it. He was already outside, standing in the grey London sunlight, waiting for Evelyn to join him. She emerged a few minutes later, Leo's hand in hers. The boy had insisted on coming, had sat through the entire proceedings without complaint, clutching his wooden ship. Now he looked up at his uncle with those pale, serious eyes. Did they believe us? Callum knelt beside him, his face soft with an emotion Evelyn had never seen there before. Yes, Leo. They believed us. Your father's name is cleared. He is a hero. Leo nodded slowly. Then, carefully, he held out the ship. I want you to have this. Callum stared at it, his breath catching. Leo, I cannot. Your father gave that to you. I know, but he would want you to have it, because you are his brother, and you saved him. Leo pressed the ship into Callum's hands. And because I have you now, I do not need the ship to remember him. I have you. Callum's eyes filled with tears. He pulled Leo into his arms, holding him tightly, and Evelyn watched them with a lump in her own throat. For 2 years, this house had been filled with silence and grief. For 2 years, these two had lived side by side without knowing how to reach each other. And now, in this moment, the wall between them finally crumbled. They returned to Cornwall in the spring, when the cliffs were covered in wildflowers and the sea was a soft, forgiving blue. The house felt different now, still remote, still windswept, but no longer cold. Mrs. Trevose had opened all the windows, letting in the fresh air and the sound of birds, and the rooms that had seemed so dark and forbidding now felt simply old, comfortable. Home. Callum stood on the headland, looking out at the sea, and Evelyn came to stand beside him. What will you do now? She asked. He was silent for a moment, considering. Live, I suppose. Actually live, not just exist. Leo deserves that. We both do. He turned to look at her, his pale eyes warm in the afternoon light. You could stay, you know, as long as you like. Leo needs you, and I... He hesitated, searching for the right words. I have come to rely on you, Evelyn, more than I expected, more than I should, perhaps. Evelyn smiled, a real smile, the first in years. I have come to rely on you, too. And on Leo. This place, it feels like home, in a way I never expected. Callum reached for her hand, his fingers intertwining with hers. Then stay, not as a governess, as whatever you wish to be, as family. She looked up at him, at this man who had been so cold and distant when she arrived, who had revealed himself to be so much more. She thought of Samuel, of the love they had shared, of the grief that had consumed her for so long. She would always love him. She would always miss him. But she was alive, and the world was still turning, and there was room in her heart for more. Yes, she said softly. I will stay. Behind them, Leo came running up the path, his face flushed with exertion, a bunch of wildflowers clutched in his hand. He skidded to a stop in front of them, grinning. Look what I found. For you, Mrs. Thorne, and for you, Uncle Callum, so you can put them in your room and remember today. Evelyn knelt to accept the flowers, her heart swelling with love for this strange, serious boy who had taught her so much about hope. Thank you, Leo. They are beautiful." Callum ruffled his nephew's hair, a gesture so natural and affectionate that Evelyn marvelled at how far they had come. "Shall we go inside? Mrs. Trevose has made pasties for supper." Leo nodded eagerly, then paused, looking back at the sea. "Do you think Papa can see us, from wherever he is?" Evelyn and Callum exchanged a glance. "I think," Callum said carefully, "that if he can, he is very proud of you, and very happy that you are not alone." Leo considered this, then nodded, satisfied. He took Evelyn's hand and Callum's, one on each side, and together they walked back toward the house. The sea murmured behind them, eternal and patient, and the wildflowers nodded in the breeze, and Valewood stood waiting, no longer a prison, but a home. That night, after Leo was asleep and the house was quiet, Evelyn stood at her window looking out at the stars. She thought of Samuel, of the life they might have had, of the years of grief that had led her here. She thought of Lucien, whose innocence had been proved too late, whose son would grow up without him. She thought of Callum, of the walls he had built, and the man he had revealed beneath them. And she thought of the future, uncertain, unwritten, but full of possibility. A knock came at her door. She opened it to find Callum standing there, a candle in his hand, his expression tentative. "I could not sleep," he said. "I kept thinking, I kept wanting to thank you, properly, for everything." "You do not need to thank me." "I know, but I want to." He hesitated, then reached out and took her hand. "Evelyn, I know that you loved your husband. I know that grief does not simply end. But I also know that I have spent 2 years alone, and I do not wish to spend any more. If you would let me, if you would consider—" She pressed her fingers to his lips, silencing him. "I know what you are trying to say, and I am not ready, not yet, to say it back. But I am not saying no either. I am saying, give me time, give us time. We have both been through so much. Let us learn to live again, together, and see where that leads." He nodded, understanding in his eyes. "Time, then. I can give you that." He lifted her hand to his lips and pressed a gentle kiss to her knuckles, then released her and walked away. Evelyn watched him go, her heart full, and when she closed the door and returned to her window, she was smiling. The sea whispered below, the stars wheeled overhead, and somewhere in the house a boy slept peacefully with his wooden ship beside him. The traitor's son. But he was not a traitor's son anymore. He was simply Leo, loved and safe, with a family around him at last. And Evelyn Thorne, who had come to this place expecting nothing but loneliness and duty, had found something she never thought she would have again: a future worth living. In the morning, she woke to sunlight streaming through her window and the sound of Leo's laughter from the courtyard below. She dressed quickly and went down to find him chasing a butterfly with Callum, both of them grinning like fools, the wooden ship forgotten on a bench nearby. Callum looked up as she approached, and the smile on his face was warmer than any she had seen from him before. "Good morning," he said. "We were just discussing the possibility of a picnic. Leo thinks the cove below the cliffs would be perfect." Leo ran over and grabbed her hand. "Will you come, Mrs. Thorne? Please, Uncle Callum says we can take the pasties and stay all afternoon." Evelyn looked from Leo's eager face to Callum's hopeful one and felt something loosen in her chest, a knot of grief and fear and loneliness that had been there so long she had forgotten it existed. "I would love that," she said. "I would love that very much." And as they set off together down the path toward the sea, Evelyn thought that perhaps this was what healing felt like. Not forgetting, not moving on, just moving forward, with the ones you loved beside you, into a future that was finally, blessedly, your own. The end. As this story draws to its final breath, I want to thank you, truly, for walking every step of this journey, for lingering in its silences, for feeling its heartache, and for believing, even in its darkest moments, that love might yet prevail. If this tale has stirred something deep within you, if it has reminded you of the quiet power of devotion, resilience, and hope, then I invite you to stay. Subscribe and step with us into many more worlds where love is tested, hearts are broken, and always something beautiful endures. Your next story is already waiting.